Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 210. Thank you so much for tuning in, watching, and listening. I have a great podcast for you today. Want to get right into today's podcast. I want to start today with a video that I saw online just a few days ago. I think it was just 2 days ago I saw this video. And this is one of the most heartbreaking videos that I've seen in a long time. And we're in the age of video and information where there are horrible videos and heartbreaking videos that I see online all the time. I don't know if you've seen this recent video that went viral yesterday. There's a woman, 45-year-old woman, walking down the streets in New York, and some trash bag, some horrible human being puts a belt around her neck while she's walking, strangles her, pulls her in between two cars, and sexually. It's all there on video. It's horrible. But this video that I'm going to share with you right now really moved me, and it goes into and further explains why I do this podcast, why I focus so much on the military-industrial complex and peace and being against war. I've been against these wars that we've been fighting for the past 2 decades, the war on terrorism. I don't believe we should have been in it. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. I don't believe that we should have taken out Gaddafi in Libya. I have been against America's foreign policy for the last 24 years, and this is why. This is a video of a veteran, and I had to look this story up. I just saw the video online, and then I was like, I have to know more about this. So I looked it up, and it's in Connecticut is where this took place. You read the headline there: Connecticut State Trooper consoles veteran contemplating suicide in body cam footage. And this is 2 years ago in 2022. Tell you real briefly about what happens. There is a truck that is pulled over on the side of the road, and this veteran is in the driver's seat of this truck. He's on the phone with the Veterans Hospital or Veteran Suicide Hotline. He's on the phone with the hotline when the trooper pulls up behind the car. Now, the trooper is not being called in from the suicide hotline. He just happens to see the truck on the side of the road, and he stops to see what's going on. And this veteran is sitting behind the wheel on the phone with the suicide hotline, bawling his eyes out. I want you to watch this. It's one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen. And this goes to why I've been doing the series of podcasts that I've been doing, and I will continue doing this podcast.
What's going on, boss? What's going on?
I'm on the phone with the VA hotline.
Okay.
For suicide.
All right. Hey, I got you, man. All right. What branch you in?
Army.
Army? All right. Hey, my name's Kyle. All right. We'll help you out. All right, bud? I'm here with you. All right? I'm going to start an ambulance over here to us, okay? All right, bud?
I can't afford.
Hey, no. Hey, if I send you, it's nothing on you, okay? State of Connecticut covers that. All right? Can we step out of the car, boss? Just so we can talk? 826. Yeah, come to the front of your truck, bud.
820.
Starting an ambulance to the 6-8 off-ramp eastbound. I'm with a vet who's on the suicide hotline.
Here's
Hey.
my ID.
Sorry, man. Hey. You have anything on you?
No.
Okay, is it all right if I check in? Cool. Any deployments, bud?
What?
One? Well, hey, dude. It's a tough time for everyone in your position, all right? Relax, though. Hey, I'm here with you, okay? I'm here. Yeah.
Wow. And it just stops with him asking for a hug. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking what these evil people did to many soldiers like that. That's what I'm talking about the human cost of these wars. And that guy's broken. And hopefully he's been able to get some help that doesn't have to do with drugs. He's probably already on drugs, because you go to the VA hospital, the first thing they're going to do is put you on drugs, because they don't care about you. They don't care about these soldiers. They just want you to go to war and be a monster and go and fight these wars for them and for their financial benefit. They don't care about how, the tough time that you're going to have being integrated back into society when you come home. They don't care about what it's doing to these people mentally, the ones that are on the streets, the ones that are actually committing suicide. And those numbers, if you haven't seen those numbers, take a look into those numbers. How many veterans of these foreign wars that we've been fighting for the past 2 decades based on lies? How many veterans are committing suicide? There's a lot of them, and they're broken. And that's why I do this podcast, because it's evil what these people have done to these guys. That's what Smedley Butler realized. He realized it after he had gone around the world executing all of these military missions for big business. And he said, war is a racket. After Smedley Butler retired, and it wasn't, the thing that really set Smedley Butler off is this right here, the bonus army. I've talked to you about the bonus army before, but this happened in 1932. The bonus army was a group of 43,000 demonstrators, 17,000 veterans of U.S. involvement in World War I, and their families, affiliated groups who had gathered in Washington, D.C. in 1932, demanding cash that Woodrow Wilson promised them. And then the Great Depression happened. They were all on the streets, and then they were all suffering. They went out and they fought Woodrow Wilson's war, World War I, and they were veterans, and they came home, and they didn't care. What's his name? Herbert Hoover, who was president at this time, cared nothing about these veterans. So they camped out in the White House. This is why I said when John McCain and Christopher Murphy went over to Ukraine during Euromaidan and they admonished Viktor Yanukovych, you better not clear the protesters out. You better not use violence to clear the protesters out, because if you do, we're prepared to sanction you. And I was like, how did these guys, where did they get the gall to go over and tell Yanukovych in Ukraine that he better not use violence to clear the square from protesters? Didn't they just use violence at the colleges last week? They sure did use violence in 1932 to clear the veterans during the bonus army. When they were protesting for their bonus, they used violence. 2 people died. 2 veterans died right here. On January 28, 1932, U.S. Attorney General William Mitchell ordered veterans removed from all government property. Washington police met with resistance, shot at the protesters, veterans and their families, and 2 veterans were wounded and later died. They don't care about you. They've never cared about you. That's why Smedley Butler, so it was the bonus army event that set Smedley Butler off. The year after the bonus army in 1933 is when the business interests approached him to stage a coup d'etat, or might have been in 34, to stage a coup d'etat on FDR. And he went public on these business interests that were trying to recruit him to stage a coup d'etat. And he understood what it was about. And he spent the rest of his life going around the country doing the speech, "War is a racket." This is a quote from Smedley Butler. "War is just a racket. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. Only a small inside group knows what it's about. It is conducted for the benefit of very few at the expense of the masses," at the expense of this guy crying on the side of the road, ready to take his own life at the expense of him. That's what Smedley Butler says. So yes, that's why I do this podcast. Now, George Bush, who sent guys like that veteran that you just saw crying on the side of the road, contemplating taking his life, George Bush sent him to Iraq and to Afghanistan and whatever other deployment that he had. And then George Bush goes to the correspondence dinner. I think this was in 2006. And he laughs about weapons of mass destruction and the entire reason that these people, these young soldiers went to Iraq and fought a war in Iraq where they saw their buddies blown to pieces with IEDs and had to kill and murder Iraqis and the trauma the mental trauma that they're now living with. George Bush, Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney's father, and Joe Biden, let's not forget Joe Biden, sent these soldiers over there based on lies. They're the ones who did that. And then they come back to the correspondence dinner with all of the media, Nancy Pelosi's in the audience here. She's laughing. The media's laughing. They're all laughing. And this guy's on the side of the road crying, thinking about contemplating his life while they're laughing.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there.
Listen to the applause and laughter. Listen to that. This is all the media. I mean, this clip is edited. If I go to C-SPAN and get the actual clip, they pan to the audience. You can see Nancy Pelosi in the audience laughing it up. She's laughing. She's smiling with her drinks and her fine dress, black ties. They're doing great. These guys are doing great. The guys that are on the side of the road with a gun in their hand, contemplating suicide, are not doing so well.
Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here. Those weapons of mass destruction.
So it's real funny, It's real funny. So Joe Biden, Joe Biden. This guy, I can't believe people are voting for this guy. I really, really cannot believe. So he did an interview finally. People were giving him all kinds of flack over the fact that he has been closed off to the media, that he hasn't been doing interviews, he hasn't been doing press conferences, that he's been really controlled, and the media was complaining about it. Even the liberal media that is basically on his side. I mean, they want to sell papers. They want people to tune in. They want to sell advertising. So they got to get this guy. It's an election year. I mean, these people count on election year ad revenue. So they got to get this guy on the air. They got to get him doing interviews, and he's been closed off. He hasn't been doing interviews, and he's been getting criticism even from the liberal media who are 100% behind him. I mean, even this interview that he did, and he finally does this interview with CNN the other night, and it's a softball interview. I mean, she coddles him. She does. I mean, the way they interview this guy and the way they interview Trump is completely different. Doesn't push back on any of his lies. And now, after this interview, there are people calling him out on his lies, and he tells quite a few whoppers. This is one of the whoppers that he tells that just blows me away. Take a listen to Joe Biden.
And obviously, we've seen that frustration here in the U.S. on college campuses. And Mr. President, had signs at college campuses. Some say Genocide Joe. Any of us that have gone to those campuses, sometimes we hear that chant. Do you hear the message of those young Americans?
Absolutely, I hear the message. Look, two things. First of all, there's a legitimate right to free speech and protest. There's a legitimate right to do that, and they have a right to do that. There's not a legitimate right to use hate speech. There's not a legitimate right to threaten Jewish students. There's not a legitimate right to block people access to class. That's against the law. That's against the law. And so, and if you look at the data, these demonstrations are real, but they're not nearly, I mean, look, and I made a speech on the Holocaust the other day. Mm-hmm. And I pointed out that, it took 7 decades to get to the place where after the Holocaust occurred, and there's still anti-Semitism. Look what's happened. In 7 weeks, 70, what's happening? Everybody's sort of forgotten about what happened in Israel. Those 1,200 young kids murdered. I saw pictures, I went over there shortly after. A mother and a daughter being roped together and then kerosene poured and burned to death. Nothing's like that to happen in the Jewish community since the Holocaust. So when I went over immediately after that happened, I said to Bibi, don't make the same mistake we made in America. We wanted to get bin Laden, and we'll help you get Sinwar. But we went into Afghanistan it made sense to go get bin Laden. It made no sense to try to unify Afghanistan. It made no sense, in my view, to engage in thinking that in Iraq they had a nuclear weapon.
It made no sense for us to go into Afghanistan and try to unify Afghanistan. It made no sense to go into Iraq and say that Iraq had a nuclear weapon, is what this guy says. This guy voted for the war in Afghanistan, and every single emergency war supplemental to fund Afghanistan when this guy was in the Senate, he voted for. He voted for the entire agenda. As far as Iraq goes, there would have been no Iraq war without Joe Biden. He was the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He brought the bill to authorize the war to the floor. He recruited all the other Democrats to vote with all of the Republicans for the authorization of the war. He saw the nuclear threat. Listen to this. This is Joe Biden selling the nuclear threat that he's now saying that we made a mistake by saying that Saddam had nuclear weapons. This is you, Joe Biden.
Saddam is dangerous. The world would be a better place without him. But the reason he poses a growing danger to the United States and its allies is that he possesses chemical and biological weapons and is seeking nuclear weapons.
So he's seeking nuclear weapons. That's the same story that the George Bush administration was saying, that they had an ongoing nuclear program, seeking nuclear weapons, buying yellow cake uranium from Niger. It was all based on lies. He was the head of the Foreign Relations Committee. He told the lies, and he told so many lies in this interview that he did the other night with CNN. She calls him on none of them. All this guy is a liar. He, along with George Bush, helped create.
It made sense to go get bin Laden. It made no sense to try to unify Afghanistan. It made no sense, in my view, to engage in thinking that in Iraq they had a nuclear weapon.
It made no sense to engage in thinking that Iraq had a nuclear weapon. He voted for all of that. He supported all of that as a senator. I mean, what does this guy think? I mean, does he not think that we can look this stuff up? Well, I mean, all of these lies that he told, it's just so ridiculous. He also told this lie. Biden claims inflation was 9% when he came into office. It was actually 1.4%. He told this lie. Listen.
We've had in terms of creating, no president's had the run we've had in terms of creating jobs and bringing down inflation. It was 9% when I came to office.
It was 9% is what he says. It's a lie. Even ABC had to call him out on that lie. Take a listen.
It was 9% when I came to office. 9%.
Inflation was actually 1.4% when Biden was sworn in, peaking at 9.1% in June 2022.
He could just say whatever. The guy can just say whatever. Just lies, lies, lies. He sold the Iraq war. He told the lies about nuclear weapons. He voted for it with George Bush, along with Afghanistan and all of the and George Bush's entire foreign policy. He voted with them. He's lying about inflation. Inflation was 1.4% when he took office. And then after he took office, he and Democrats alone, without a single Republican vote, passed $1.9 trillion stimulus. 8 weeks later, inflation reaches 9%. And that's what ABC says here. Then he comes into office without a single Republican vote, just with Democrats alone, and the vice president being the tie-breaking vote, because it was 50-50, if you remember, in the Senate when they suspend the filibuster, pass this $2 trillion stimulus, and then 8 weeks later is when it jumped up to 9%. It was 1.4 when he took office. He just says whatever.
It was 9% when I came to office. 9%.
Inflation was actually 1.4% when Biden was sworn in, peaking at 9.1% in June 2022. It has.
So in June 22, I guess it took a year to peak that high. So this was another part of this interview that made a lot of hay and is still causing a lot of controversy. And if you read what it says here, this was the part of the interview where Joe Biden says that he's not going to be supplying Israel with weapons if they move into Rafah. I mean, Israel's already moving into Rafah. We discussed this in the beginning of the last podcast, but I want to go further in, and I'm still, if you remember what I said in the last podcast, I believe that Joe Biden, with this Gaza situation, he is walking a tightrope. And if you don't know what's going on, if you've been living under a rock, let me just explain the political aspects of this. Michigan, there's about 7 states in this election that are coming up in November that are going to decide the elections. And if you don't live in one of these 7 states, your vote, honestly, isn't that important. I mean, it's going to come down to these 7 states. One of these states is Michigan. There's also a large Muslim population in Wisconsin, but the largest Muslim population in the United States is Dearborn, Michigan. And the election in Michigan in 2020, I think it came down to about 100,000 votes. So you had a huge protest in the primary there where Michigan voters voted for, a no-name candidate, or I forget what the candidate was, but it was a no-name candidate that they all came out and voted for in protests. And I think it was like almost 300,000 of those votes. And Joe Biden he's walking this tightrope because he supports Israel. Like I said, he used to be on the Foreign Relations Committee. He's identified himself as a Zionist. So he supports Israel fully, but he has to show this Muslim community in Michigan and in Wisconsin that he cares about the people in Gaza and that he's not going to support what Israel is doing in Gaza. He has to do that publicly so he doesn't lose Michigan, but privately, I believe that he's supporting what Netanyahu and Israel is doing as far as moving into Gaza. I think that he wants them to go in and end this right away, and that's his private position. But publicly, he's saying this. Let's take a listen.
I want to ask you about something happening as we sit here and speak, and that, of course, is Israel is striking Rafah. I know that you have paused, Mr. President, shipments of 2,000-pound U.S. bombs to Israel due to concern that they could be used in any offensive on Rafah. Have those bombs those powerful 2,000-pound bombs, been used to kill civilians in Gaza?
Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. And I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet.
They're in Rafah, bro.
I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah.
So I'm not going to be supplying the weapons that have historically been used to deal with Rafah. So he's only talking about a specific type of weapons. He's not talking about that I'm not going to give weapons to Israel. He's talking about a specific type of weapon. And just, so he's not talking about a stopping shipment of weapons. It's a specific type of weapons. And that's what he's talking about.
They haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to.
It's just wrong.
And the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells.
So, just to understand.
So I personally believe that because like I said, this guy was ducking the press. He refused to do interviews. I think they set up this interview specifically so Biden could sell this, could give this information out in public and say this publicly. I think that's the entire reason that they set up this interview.
At least recently, but it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells.
So, just to understand what they're doing right now in Rafah.
They're already in Rafah.
Going into
This is what she's saying. She's like, they're already in Rafah. What are you talking about if they go into Rafah?
To understand what they're doing right now in Rafah. Is that not going into Rafah as you define it?
They haven't gone into the population centers. What they did is right on the border, and it's causing problems with right now in terms of with Egypt, which I've worked very hard to make sure we have a relationship and help. But I've made it clear to Bibi and the War Cabinet, they're not going to get our support if, in fact, they go in these population centers. We're not walking away from Israel's security. We're walking away from Israel's ability to wage war in those areas.
So it's not over your red line yet?
Not yet, but we've held up the weapons.
Okay, so we've held up the weapons. Israel is already in Rafah. I played the clip for you in the last podcast, and that's when they dropped the leaflets on Monday morning. They already started moving in, like Joe Biden was just saying they're just on the border. No, they're going in full on ahead. Israel forges ahead with Rafah operation is what this article says in Sky News. And this is Netanyahu in his own words in English. He addresses his country in their language, and then he made this address in English, which is an address to our country and to the West. Take a listen.
80 years ago, in the Holocaust, the Jewish people were totally defenseless against those who sought our destruction. No nation came to our aid. Today, we again confront enemies bent on our destruction. I say to the leaders of the world, no amount of pressure, no decision by any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself. As the Prime Minister of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. But we know we're not alone, because countless decent people.
So it's funny when I first watched this, and he says that if we have to stand alone, then we will stand alone. And he says, but we won't have to stand alone. And I was like, is Bibi getting ready to say, because God is on our side? I was going to say, is Bibi getting ready to say that we're not alone because God is on our side. I started to get excited there for a little bit, but that's not what he said.
Israel will stand alone. But we know we're not alone because countless decent people around the world support our just cause.
So Israel's going full on ahead with the operation, which is what I believe that Joe Biden wants. I believe that privately he is over there telling Israel, well, he's not over there. Who's over there? Who's over there? Listen to this.
All right, the director of the CIA, that's William Burns, met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel today.
That's right. The talks coincide with the U.S.'s growing optimism over the ongoing ceasefire negotiations in Cairo.
So the CIA, Joe Biden's CIA director is over in Israel doing his foreign policy and diplomacy. What's William Burns doing over there? The CIA director meeting with Netanyahu. He's not only in Netanyahu, meeting with Netanyahu. They had this meeting in Cairo. Members of Hamas had come over to Egypt as well, and they're trying to negotiate this ceasefire. And Burns is over in Cairo, too. Take a listen.
Of a potential breakthrough in the Israel-Hamas war, CIA Director William Burns is now in Cairo for a ceasefire.
So Burns is going back and forth from Jerusalem to Cairo. He's negotiating the foreign policy on Joe Biden's behalf. That's what the Secretary of State is for. But Blinken's over there too. Blinken met with Netanyahu in Israel as a U.S. ramps up push for a ceasefire. So Blinken's over there negotiating. Burns, the CIA director's over there negotiating. You had all those protests and bad press last week, and then Joe Biden comes out and says that he's going if Israel goes into Rafah, which is something that he's been saying for weeks, that they are against an invasion of Rafah. And Joe Biden is saying publicly that if this happens, that he's going to cut off some weapons to Israel, and that it's a red line for him if Israel goes into Rafah. Now, I believe, I said it in the last podcast, I said it in the beginning of this podcast, that Joe Biden is publicly saying that he has a red line for Israel going into Rafah. But I think privately, through his surrogates, like William Burns, his CIA director, through his Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, that they're over there and they're supporting the invasion, because this is the deal. This is the deal. Washington Post, this paragraph right here in the Washington Post, despite the pause, and they're talking about the pause on these weapons, these certain type of weapons that Joe Biden says that he's going to pause, and he's already paused these weapons to Israel. Despite the pause, the Israeli military has enough weapons supplied by the U.S. and other partners to conduct the Rafah operation if it chooses to cast aside U.S. objections, the first official says. So if Israel decides that they want to do what Netanyahu already said, we're going to go alone. But we know we won't be alone because there's many people who are on our side. But Netanyahu says we're going to go alone, and then they have enough weapons supplied by Biden. Biden has already given them enough weapons for the Rafah operation. So you're telling me, and Biden's been saying for weeks that he's against the operation in Rafah. So you're telling me that you've been against the operation in Rafah for weeks, for months, but you gave them enough weapons to do the operation in Rafah? That don't make sense. So they have the weapons, even if with the pause, even with Joe Biden with this faux, red line, and we're gonna, they're not going to get our supports if they do this. Joe Biden, you've already given them the weapons to do this operation. Take a listen to Margaret here.
Say it is fraught when it comes to the Netanyahu government, most certainly. But the United States and Israel, in terms of their security partnership, as their IDF spokesperson came out and said today, is at an unprecedented scale. I mean, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, just ushered through $26 billion in aid. When we talk about this short-term pause of these dumb bombs, the 3,500 bombs, about half of which are 2,000-pound munitions, this is a sliver of the amount of U.S. taxpayer weaponry that is provided to the Israeli military.
This is a sliver. You trying to play us and say that you have a red line and that you're not going to give them weapons if they're already in Rafah. They're going further into Rafah. We're going to pause these weapons. This is a sliver, is what Margaret says. You're running game on us, Joe Biden. You're trying to. That they have the weapons to do the Rafah operation. These weapons aren't necessary. That Biden is saying, putting up a front saying that he's pausing weapons. He's not pausing any weapons. He's fully supporting Israel and their invasion of Rafah.
Say it is fraught when it comes to the Netanyahu government, most certainly. But the United States and Israel, in terms of their security partnership, as their IDF spokesperson came out and said today, is at an unprecedented scale. I mean, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, just ushered through $26 billion in aid. When we talk about this short-term pause of these dumb bombs, the 3,500 bombs, about half of which are 2,000-pound munitions, this is a sliver of the amount of U.S. taxpayer weaponry that is provided to the Israeli military. And so when you have this kind of pause, it is a big deal simply because Israel was told in any way by the White House to slow their roll, essentially, here when it comes to what they're doing in Rafah in southern Gaza. But in the scale of things, it is not necessarily leaving them without the weapons.
In the scale of things, it's not a big deal. In a scale of things, it's not a big deal because Joe Biden this is a show. For the voters in Michigan and for the voters in Wisconsin, I think that he thinks that they're stupid or something. I think that he thinks all those people, all those Muslim voters in Michigan and Wisconsin are stupid and that they don't watch CBS News. But that's what this show is about, this red line show. We're pausing some weapons. We don't support an invasion of Rafah. Whatever, bro. The numbers speak for themselves.
3,500 bombs, about half of which are 2,000-pound munitions. This is a sliver of the amount of U.S. taxpayer weaponry that is provided to the Israeli military. And so when you have this kind of pause, it is a big deal simply because Israel was told in any way by the White House to slow their roll, essentially, here when it comes to what they're doing in Rafah in southern Gaza. But in the scale of things, it is not necessarily leaving them without the weapons that they need in this immediate moment in time. And Senate Republicans are quick to argue that Israel is being left in the lurch. But
so the Senate Republicans, not only Senate Republicans, House Republicans are making a huge mistake. And this guy, this payaso right here, wow, what a disappointment. So Republicans in general in Congress are making a huge mistake. You guys, so Joe Biden is obviously a lot smarter than these clowns politically because he has been taking them to the woodshed politically. He's gotten every single thing that he wants. If it wasn't McCarthy, if it's Johnson, he's just really taking them to the woodshed politically. So you guys remember how it just happened just a few months ago, but how Joe Biden tried to make and the Democrats tried to make Republicans own the border crisis. Joe Biden hasn't secured the border for his first 2.5 years. The border has seen record numbers of illegal crosses, record numbers of gotaways. There is a huge migrant crisis in this country because of Joe Biden's border policy. And it was Joe Biden's problem. But Joe Biden made the Republicans own that problem because they put this bill up in the Senate because, and I've explained all this to you, Joe Biden did this because he wanted to get Ukraine funding. So he said that we'll negotiate this border bill and we'll get a Republican to negotiate with. And they found, Opie Cunningham over in Oklahoma to negotiate this horrible border bill with Democrats, and then they don't pass it in the Senate. Trump comes out against the bill and says, "Don't do the bill," and then then the Democrats turned around and then they tried to make Republicans own the border issue, that it's their fault that the border is a mess. Even though Joe Biden's policy has created the border crisis for the past 2.5 years, because Republicans in Congress, in the Senate, voted down this border bill that Joe Biden did with Opie Cunningham, and so they own it now. And Donald Trump says, don't do this bill, so they own the border. That's what Joe Biden is doing with this Gaza situation, and Republicans are walking right into it. Gaza is Joe Biden's foreign policy dilemma. He's the one who's got to contend with the voters in Michigan and the voters in New York, quite frankly. He's the one who has to do this balancing act between his Jewish support and his Muslim support. This is his dilemma. And now, because he's pausing a slither of weapons and saying that he has a red line on Gaza, nothing in the evidence shows that he has a red line. He just did the speech on the Holocaust Memorial the other day. He's in full support of Israel. Everything shows that, but he pauses a sliver of weapons, knowing Joe Biden is playing checkers and these idiots are playing chess. Joe Biden knows what reaction that he's going to get from them when he pauses this slither of weapons. Israel's moving forward with their operation. So now Republicans are talking about impeaching Joe Biden and putting up this fight. So he's gonna shift the blame. He's gonna make them own Gaza, and they're walking right into it. Take a listen to Mike Johnson.
Now, Mr. Speaker, in a rare sit-down interview yesterday, Joe Biden said that he is going to stop shipments of bombs and artillery shells to Israel if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu orders more invasions of Rafah and the Gaza Strip into the population areas. What's your reaction? Didn't you?
Listen,
y'all said we're giving you money for these weapons, send these weapons over. Is he able to do this without Congress?
Ainsley, he's defying the will of Congress, and he's defying what his own top officials in the White House.
So with this, I mean, if you don't know, they're making is he defying Congress because he's not delivering this slither of weapons? They're relating it back to the reason that Donald Trump was impeached in 2019 because of the phone call with Zelensky. Donald Trump had held back some Javelin missiles from giving to Zelensky, and you remember the whole impeachment trial. So everyone's relating that what Joe Biden's doing by holding back this sliver of 2,000-pound bombs from Israel as they go into Rafah. Everyone's relating it back to, Everyone's relating it back to what Trump did and was impeached for with Zelensky and Ukraine. So everybody's calling for Biden to be impeached now. Don't even waste our time, bro. You guys are so feckless. You already impeached Mayorkas, sent the articles of impeachment to the Senate. They vote on party lines to kill the impeachment without having a trial. And then the day after they do that, you pass Joe Biden's foreign policy agenda. You clowns, I swear, don't even waste our time in impeaching Joe Biden. You're so feckless. You have no power. You have no leverage. If you send articles of impeachment on Joe Biden for holding back these weapons to Israel, the only thing the Senate's going to do is do what they did with the Mayorkas impeachment, and they're going to vote on party lines to kill it. There won't be an impeachment trial, and then you own Gaza. You own that dilemma. You own that mess. And Joe Biden has successfully transferred this dilemma to you idiots. So now they're talking about impeaching him. It's just not only are they talking about impeaching him, I think articles of impeachment, this rep from Florida has already entered articles of impeachment this morning, and these people are a mess.
This just in, Florida Congressman Corey Mills has formally filed articles of impeachment against President Joe Biden over his threat to withhold arms to Israel. The legislation consists of a single article citing abuse of presidential power. It reads in part, in violation of his oath to faithfully execute the office of president and to uphold the Constitution, President Biden abused the powers of his office by soliciting a quid pro quo with Israel while leveraging vital military aid for policy changes.
So you don't think that Joe Biden and his group sat down and thought this all out, that they anticipated Republicans' response, and then they had it there on the whiteboard. Ooh, and then the next thing they're going to do, they're going to try to impeach you, and then we can make them own it. They had this all, like, again, they're playing checkers, you're playing chess. They already anticipated that you're going to come out and object because you're so pro-Israel, and you got to support Israel, and you're war hawks, so he already knows the reaction he's going to get from the Republicans. So they're playing right into his hands, and it's ridiculous. I mean, the Republicans in the House of Representatives are so feckless. We have to get rid of these people. Marjorie Taylor Greene finally this week she submitted a motion for Mike Johnson to vacate his seat. And it only takes one person. They ended up getting almost 50 votes to move the motion ahead. It didn't pass. Majority of the Republicans voted with basically the entire Democrat caucus to save Mike Johnson. But these turncoat Republicans, like this girl, Stephanie Bice. She's from Oklahoma, Stephanie Bice. She says, so when Marjorie Taylor Greene enters this motion for Johnson to vacate, these guys, and these are the guys who voted for the Ukraine aid. These are the milquetoast Republicans. These are Republicans that are not part of the Freedom Caucus. And why are they even Republicans in Congress that are not part of the Freedom Caucus? The Freedom Caucus should be the entire Republican caucus. But these are middle of the road milquetoast Republicans. And when Marjorie Taylor Greene enters the motion for Johnson to vacate, they go out and they have this press conference on the steps of the Capitol. And I want you to listen to what Stephanie Bice says here, because what she says here, it shows why there is a disconnect between people like me and people like her and Mike Johnson and the milquetoast Republicans, because it doesn't seem like they understood the assignment when we put them in the majority last year. Take a listen.
There is no plan. Marjorie wants to, sow chaos and division within the Republican Party. Someone has to govern. We have the smallest majority in history currently.
And they all said, if you watch this press conference, they all came up and said, we only have a 1-seat majority. We have the smallest majority in Congress right now. We can't do anything with the 1-seat majority. And I've explained to you that, no, you can't pass your agenda, our agenda, with the 1-seat majority in the House. You don't have the Senate. You don't have the White House. But what you do have with the 1-seat majority, you have the power to block Joe Biden's agenda. You have the power not to fund Joe Biden's agenda in the House of Representatives with 1 seat. With 1 seat, you have that power. And then listen to what Stephanie Bice says here. So they don't understand the assignment.
Has to govern. We have the smallest majority in history currently. And this speaker has been put in an untenable situation to try to govern. With a 1-seat majority in the House, Democrat-controlled Senate, and a Democratic White House. We are up against a wall here, and the American people are frustrated. They are angry.
Yeah, we're frustrated. We're frustrated.
They want Republicans to govern. This does not help. It's not effective. It's actually sowing, I think, division within the conference. We've got to get back on track. We understand the frustration with the border. All of us standing here before you realize the border is an issue. We want to solve it too, but holding government hostage is not the way to do that.
So listen to what she says. So we understand that the border is an issue. The border is an issue to all of us. It's a major issue. The border and the economy are the top 2 issues to voters, to all voters. The border and the economy. She says that we understand the border is an issue. It's an issue to all of us, but holding the government hostage is not the answer. What? What do you mean holding the government hostage is not the answer? That's exactly what we want you to do. We want you to stop funding, to hold the government hostage, to hold Joe Biden's agenda hostage. Do not let them pass anything until they fix the border, until they do what you want. It's called leverage. Mrs. Bice, maybe you don't understand leverage, but leverage takes courage. And you guys obviously don't have any courage. Now, Speaker Johnson, this was before the vote to fund Ukraine, $95 billion to fund Israel, to fund the Indo-Pacific and Taiwan that they passed 2 weeks ago. And in all that controversy that went on that week when we knew that Mike Johnson was going to bring it to the floor, he went out doing tons of interviews explaining why he was bringing this bill to the floor, why he was passing Joe Biden's agenda. And now this guy is saying because Joe Biden has paused these weapons to Israel, is that Joe Biden betrayed him. No, he played you, fool. He didn't betray you. This is what this guy's saying now, that Joe Biden betrayed him. No, he didn't betray you. He played you because he's playing checkers and you're playing chess and you got played. But in this interview with Mark Levin that I want you to listen to, he says here the entire reason that he supported the foreign aid package, the funding to Ukraine, is because he thought Israel and funding Israel was so important that he couldn't get Israel funded without passing the Ukraine and the Taiwan stuff. So that's why he did it all together. And I want you to listen to this because Mark Levin asked him specifically about leverage. Leverage, people. He asked him specifically about leverage, which now you have none because you've already passed Joe Biden's entire agenda. So you have no leverage. And now he's saying Joe Biden betrayed him. What a clown.
Now, what do you make of the point where some of our friends are saying, now, wait a minute. We were going to use foreign aid as leverage to secure the border.
Leverage.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, great point. The number one priority for the American people is the border. Of course, it's our number one priority as well. We've been fighting on that every single day since Joe Biden walked into the Oval Office and started issuing those executive orders to open that border wide. You and I both know they did that by design. They engineered it. That's the reason we just impeached Mayorkas in the House, because they did this to open the borders and bring people in, I think, to turn them into voters and change the outcome of the decennial census. Okay, that's the game. Well, it's caused untold damage to the country, and we've got probably a real estimate about 16 million illegals in the country. The American people are irate about that because of all the parade of horribles that comes from it. Fentanyl poisoning deaths and violent crimes and murders by violent criminals that come in from all over the world. But here's the thing. We passed laws to fix it. We passed H.R. 2, our signature legislation, the Secure the Border Act. We sent that to Chuck Schumer over a year ago. He's completely ignored it. They don't want to close the border. And here's the thing. I remind everybody, the Republican Party is in charge of only one house of Congress. And by the way, Mark, we have the smallest margin in U.S.
We have a small majority. We only are in charge in one house. Yeah, you have enough power to use leverage, buddy. Don't give me that one seat majority and we're only in charge of one house. The question was about leverage, and you have leverage. You have the power to leverage the House of Representatives and not pass anything out of the House of Representatives until you get some assurances from Democrats and Joe Biden.
People are irate about that because of all the parade of horribles that comes from it. Fentanyl poisoning deaths and violent crimes and murders by violent criminals that come in from all over the world. But here's the thing. We passed laws to fix it. We passed H.R. 2, our signature legislation, the Secure the Border Act. We sent that to Chuck Schumer over a year ago. He's completely ignored it. They don't want to close the border. And here's the thing. I remind everybody, the Republican Party is in charge of only one house of Congress. And by the way, Mark, we have the smallest margin in U.S. history. I have a one-vote margin.
That's
that
enough.
Means if we want to close the border, we can pass it. If we get all the Republicans, keep them all together, we can send it to the Senate, and we did. But then it dies there. because the Democrats, the open border Democrats, run the Senate and the White House.
Yeah, but you got stuff that they want. That's why the question was about leverage. Notice how he's not answering the question. He's talking about, we only have a 1-seat majority. We only, control the House. That's enough for leverage, bro. You have enough to leverage. You have stuff. If they don't want to close the border, then you don't pass Ukraine aid. If they don't close the border, then you don't pass FISA. If they don't close the border, then, you don't pass their budget. You shut the government down. That's what's called leverage. You have the power to do that.
Republicans keep them all together. We can send it to the Senate, and we did. But then it dies there because the Democrats, the open border Democrats, run the Senate and the White House. I can't force it into law. And here's the point. Even if we were able to pass it into law, they'd ignore it. We have federal immigration laws in the books, but Mayorkas and Biden have flouted it. They don't care. They've ignored it. They would do it again. So we've demanded that the president use his executive authority, which he clearly has in the law. I've sent it to him. I handed it to him in person with a menu of options.
Then why'd you pass his agenda? If he's doing that to you, if he's treating you like that, you're the Speaker of the House. If he won't work with you, why are you passing his agenda, buddy? Why? You're playing yourself. Joe Biden's not even playing you. You're playing yourself. It's ridiculous.
In U.S. history, I have a 1-vote margin. That means if we want to close the border, we can pass it. If we get all the Republicans, keep them all together, we can send it to the Senate, and we did. But then it dies there because the Democrats, the open border Democrats, run the Senate and the White House. I can't force it into law. But here's the point. Even if we were able to pass it into law, they'd ignore it. We have federal immigration laws in the books, but Mayorkas and Biden have flouted it. They don't care. They've ignored it. They would do it again. So we've demanded that the president use his executive authority, which he clearly has in the law. I've sent it to him. I handed it to him in person with a menu of options. He won't take it because they want the border to be open. So to put the border on this foreign supplemental package would be a great thing. We would do it again. But here's the problem. Because I have a 1-vote margin, I have to have every single Republican in the House to agree to attach it. Here's the second part of that. We've got a handful of people who are never Ukrainers, and they don't want to fund Ukraine at all, right? So they won't agree to do that. And because I can't do that with the Republicans, I would need Democrats to attach it. No Democrat's going to vote for border security. So it's a mathematical impossibility.
Mr. Speaker, I listened to you. I analyzed this stuff on my own. And we are boxing ourselves in, as you're explaining, as I've tried to explain to the audience, and as I say to these people who text me, conservatives, if the Speaker would only listen to me, if we shut down the government, if we did this, we did that, not one of the things that they say is possible.
That's ridiculous, Mark Levin. They definitely have the power to shut down the government. What are you talking about? They can shut down the government?
Conservatives. If the Speaker would only listen to me, if we shut down the government, if we did this, we did that, not one of the things that they say is possible.
Absolutely wrong.
It's not doable.
No, not exactly.
You don't have the votes to do what they want.
You have the votes to shut down the government. You do. You can shut down the government. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to vote on it.
It's not doable. You don't have the votes to do what they want. You don't have the votes to do what I call the rhinos want. You're walking a tightrope. Now, let me ask you this bluntly. If, in fact, you did what some of these folks are saying...
So first he says, listen to Mark Levin. First he's saying that you don't have the power to do it, you can't do it, but if you did it...
The votes to do what they want. You don't have the votes to do what I call the rhinos want. You're walking a tightrope. Now, let me ask you this bluntly.
But if you did...
If, in fact, you did what some of these folks are saying, nothing would happen again... and our allies, including Israel, wouldn't get the arms that they need while they're under attack. Is that correct?
So listen to Mark Levin. He's more concerned with Israel than anything. We got to make sure that Israel is getting the weapons that they need. And if you shut down the government, if you, use leverage, use the government as leverage, use Ukraine as leverage, then Israel doesn't get their weapons. So our focus, Mark Levin's focus, Speaker Johnson's focus, we got to make sure that Israel is funded. So we have to give Joe Biden what he wants, which is Ukraine, because we've already passed funding for Israel. It's just sitting there in the Senate. They're not going to pass it because they know if they pass Israel, then they won't get Ukraine. So Ukraine is our priority again. So we have to pass Ukraine to get Israel. That's why this guy's saying that Joe Biden betrayed him, because that's the understanding that he had, is that if we pass Ukraine, then Israel's going to be fully funded. Israel's going to get everything that they need. So now that Joe Biden is holding back these weapons from Israel, that's why this guy's saying that Joe Biden betrayed him. No, he didn't betray you. He played you. Or you playing yourself.
Rhinos want, you're walking a tightrope. Now, let me ask you this bluntly. If, in fact, you did what some of these folks are saying, nothing would happen again, and our allies, including Israel, wouldn't get the arms that they need while they're under attack. Is that correct or not?
100%. Here's the thing. The Democrats have an Israel problem, right? We have funded Israel, as you know. I mean, it was within 24 hours of my becoming speaker back in October. We funded Israel. We sent it over with a pay for. We took the $14 billion out of the IRS slush fund, expansion fund, and made Israel a priority instead. Chuck Schumer ignored it. About a month ago, Mark, I tried again. I sent a plain, clean, we call it a clean Israel funding bill. I put that on the floor to vote on. No pay for. Send it over. Let's just take care of Israel and get it off the table. 166 House Democrats voted against it. You know why? Because President Biden issued a veto threat for a clean Israel funding bill. You know why he did that?
Because President Biden knows how to do politics. That's why he issued a veto threat, because, again, President Biden is playing checkers and you're playing chess. So he knows what he's doing. That's why he issued a veto
no pay
threat.
for. Send it over. Let's just take care of Israel and get it off the table. 166 House Democrats voted against it. You know why? Because President Biden issued a veto threat for a clean Israel funding bill. You know why he did that? Because they're terrified. They have the pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat Party is going crazy right now. And he knows that if he does that, he funds Israel on its own, he has a civil war in his party. So they won't do it. They won't touch it. The Senate Democrats won't give Israel the funding. Mark, the only way that you and I and the American people can ensure that Israel gets the help it needs in this desperate hour is to attach it in this foreign supplemental package.
Listen, the only way that we can get the Israel funding, listen to what he says, his own words. The only way we can get the Israel funding is to pass the Ukraine and in this package, because Joe Biden and the Democrats know how to do politics. They know how to use leverage. So they know what you want. So they played you. You got played. Now, I'm almost done. So they're trying to get this ceasefire deal done, is what they're telling us. I don't believe they're trying to get a ceasefire deal done at all. So there's not going to be a ceasefire. So they're telling everybody they're trying to get this ceasefire deal. And there's not going to be a ceasefire because what Joe Biden wants Israel to do is to move into Rafah. They want them to finish it and finish it quick so they can get this thing over with. And that's what he's hoping for. That's what I believe is going on, is that Joe Biden is really privately wants Israel. They have the weapons to do the job. Go in, finish the job, finish it up so we can get this finished. So it's not, lagging on throughout the summer and into the fall. So that's what I believe is going on. Privately, Joe Biden is supporting the raid in Rafah. Publicly, he's saying that he has a red line for Israel on going into Rafah, and he's going to try to make the Republicans own it. And from what I see, they're walking right into his trap. But this is why there's not going to be a ceasefire. Take a listen.
That may suspend this bloody war, now nearly 7 months on, hinges on a swap for hostages. The pause would reportedly be weeks long. For every one hostage Hamas releases, Israel would release a larger number of Palestinians held in Israeli jails.
So the whole peace negotiation or ceasefire negotiation is around these hostages, and Hamas and Israel are not seeing eye to eye on the hostage negotiation. Let's start this clip here.
From United. The fear from some families of those still held hostage by Hamas is that the destruction of the militant group could mean the death of their loved ones. Tonight, supporters of those captive rallied for their peaceful release and against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's vow to...
So this is in Israel. The families of the members, tons of protesters protesting against Netanyahu. They don't... a lot of people in Israel don't want the mission into Rafah because they're saying that the family members are saying that they're going to kill the hostages, our family members, if you move into Rafah. But CNN was reporting this week, and I thought it was very interesting. Take a listen to this. So she's talking about the ceasefire negotiations and why the ceasefire negotiations are breaking down.
The main stumbling block appears to be this issue of the 33 hostages who were set to be released. Those would include women, female soldiers, the elderly, the sick. And in the deal, or the proposed deal that Hamas agreed to, there's a crucial change in the verbiage around that. And they essentially are saying that some of those hostages could be returned dead, that their remains...
When I heard this, I was like, what? Those aren't hostages. Those are bodies. What are you telling me? That the reason that they can't make this ceasefire work is because Hamas is telling Israel that we don't have 33 live hostages. That some of these hostages that we want to return to you are dead. And those aren't hostages. Those are bodies. So listen to this, that Hamas is saying that they can't even come up with 33 live hostages. Are any of the hostages alive? Do we know this? Has Israel gotten proof of life? Listen to this.
Are saying that some of those hostages could be returned dead, that their remains would be returned if 33 could not be found alive. The Israelis have said
33 could not be found alive. Wow. They don't even know if they have 33 live hostages that Hamas is trying to negotiate. They're saying that we'll give you dead bodies, we'll give you their remains, and they're trying to negotiate a ceasefire with that. There's not going to be a ceasefire. Who knows what's going to happen? So I didn't really get into the protests and the political aspects of the protest, which I will get into on Monday. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday.